Okay, so we're going to talk about essential executive function skills. And as Shannon said, I'm from Eastern Illinois University, and I'm the director of STEP, which is our students' transitional education program for college students here who have autism. And there's a lot that gets wrapped up in this concept of executive functions. I have a lot of material here today, and I'll try to move through things quickly, but articulately. What everybody is hoping for ultimately is the highest level of independence and self-direction that, our student is capable of achieving. And that's the ultimate goal. And that's a big transformation. And as students move out of their teen years and look into their young adult lives, everybody is sometimes wondering how much and how well will that person be able to set their own goals? How accurately will they be able to evaluate their efforts toward those goals or make decisions that take into account all of the different variables that one has to navigate, whether that be in an educational environment or the work environment, and in the community at large. And so keeping those things in mind, the students that we interact with here in this post-secondary educational environment often have what they call, or their parents may call, this rude awakening, leaving that world of high school, leaving the K through 12 educational system that so many of those students and parents and caregivers have come to understand so well. And then many things change, of course, when you arrive on the university campus. These are actual quotes that our students have said over the last number of years. One of my favorites at the bottom, I think I threw my phone away. Indeed, he had thrown the phone away several days before. But often the comments students have are to do with realizing that things are more challenging and more demanding than they might have anticipated. And so before I talk about some of the executive function skills, which are higher level brain processes that ultimately allow us to navigate and regulate and mediate our efforts. Before I talk about those, I kind of want to discuss some of the daily demands in the university environment. So we're into this post-secondary educational world. Academically, there are many things that a student is going to have to navigate: writing multi-page papers, reading and comprehending multi-chapter reading assignments. There's a lot of deduction of information and integration from a lecture, from notes, from other resources, learning materials. Things move at a fast pace. There's a lot of document management and independent navigation of learning and thinking for the academics themselves. And of course, if your student is taking 4 or 5 college classes, that means 4 or 5 different professors, each with their own style and organizational system. There's a tremendous demand for the student to plan and manage everything from locating information that's necessary for those course assignments to being on the website and paying attention to email that has to do with housing deadlines or signing up for advising appointments, notifications for your floor meeting on your residence hall. There's a lot of information that's just floating that you have to sort, collect, assimilate, break it into doable parts. And that also extends to assignments. There's a massive amount of planning and managing that a college student is expected to deal with fairly independently. That includes thinking about time, priorities, balancing what might be urgent with other competing demands. So a lot of planning. There's a significant amount of communication, both using verbal, linguistic skills and their social nonverbal skills. Professors will expect a student to initiate communication. either after class, before class, mostly during office hours. That means students need to be able to approach the professor or the graduate assistant. They have to approach their peers in that classroom. And this might be with a group of 25 to 30 students that they've never seen or met before. And that repeats itself with each separate class. Students are, it's expected that if they don't fully understand, that they will seek to clarify, or conversely, that they'll have the communication skills needed to clarify others' potential misunderstandings of what they mean. And then, of course, there's a whole different level of socially understanding the boundaries of friendships, relationships, and what those mean. There's a lot of technology demand that comes in the university environment. Email, if your high school student isn't necessarily yet looking at or reading or answering email, that's coming. Professors will almost exclusively supplement what they deliver verbally in class with email updates. Housing office registration, disability services, any advising, everything will be delivered via email. And that's a significant challenge. We work a lot on just having students open their email and read it, and then also answer it. You have to answer the email as well. Of course, there's the daily living of, laundry, nutrition, sleep, medication, if the student is taking meds, managing financial aspects, electronic devices, just so that they are able to locate and adjust and find everything that they need. Coping and adjusting. I've been at this university, I've been a professor here for 19 years, and with STEP specifically full-time in the past 4 years. And college students are having a much more difficult time with emotional coping and adjustment than they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And yes, certainly there are changes that I feel are related to COVID, but unfortunately, we don't see things improving necessarily. So it is an area of concern. And particularly in the population of students who have autism, when so many of these students also have a comorbid diagnosis of anxiety or depression. And so we're often talking with families to anticipate those types of routines. So there's a lot that is coming at that student, a lot of expectations. And so if we look at a critical transition skills for the student who's realistically looking to be in a post-secondary education environment, that student needs to have reasonably accurate self-awareness. So it's great if the parents, caregivers, teachers are aware that the student needs support. What really matters is how well that student is aware of those needs themselves. The student needs to have a somewhat flexible ability to take perspective of others. You don't have to be great at your communication, but you do need to have a bit of flexibility in recognizing that others will have different perspectives or thoughts or expectations. Of course, you must have the academic aptitude and preparation, because no matter what, that level of reasoning, thinking, studying, and learning is coming. The coping and stress management skills, a desire to have help. So that's also critical. You can't expect a student to go seek out support if they really don't feel they need it or don't want to have that help, and that's their choice. Students who do well in post-secondary ed often have higher level language and developed reasoning skills. They have some success and experience directing parts of their day. That is, they've moved through high school and they've probably spent most of their time in general education courses, college prep even, and they're directing a lot of their day more so than needing someone to remind them And finally, we want a solid foundation of these executive functions, because ultimately, whatever it is you're directing, whether it's your academic, your planning, your time, your coping skills, your daily living, all of those outcomes require that you direct yourself and regulate. And those are intrinsically based in these things called executive functions. So what are those? So from a neuropsychological perspective, executive functions are often spoken of as metacognitive brain skills that sort of operate as an umbrella overarching all of the other thinking and reasoning skills that we develop. If we started at the bottom of this model, foundationally, one needs good attention in order to notice information, to track details, and direct your attention towards the effort to monitor what I'm doing, how well I am doing it, to monitor the passage of time, to monitor whether I've double checked and confirmed. Attention is a key executive function. Working memory is the ability to hold something in mind temporarily, long enough to process it, long enough to do something with that information, long enough to write a note, put it in your phone, put it in an app, jot it down, hold that in mind long enough to execute it. Inhibition is the brain's ability to self-stop. There is literally a mechanism in the front part of your brain that serves as the brakes. And that might be to pause your response for a little bit, to pause your comments, or to delay your behaviors, or often it means to stop that action or response entirely. To have inhibitory control is a key ability of executive function to self-regulate. Fluency. This implies the idea that I can generate options. I have a fluent ability to come up with ideas, with possibilities, to come up with alternative plans when the first one fails, or to come up with all the different steps that might be needed. Strategic planning is the ability to use reasoning to anticipate possible complications, to use reasoning to predict how something will play out, to anticipate an outcome, to use reasoning to organize all of these possible steps and ideas into some kind of coherent, strategic, effective, viable plan. That is, I have a plan and it is likely to succeed. It's a strategic plan. It's not trial and error, and it's not guesswork. And all that's fine and well, but there's a separate, other distinct executive function known as initiation. And just as there is a part of the brain that is engaged in stopping, there are also other neural networks engaged in starting. So to overcome anxiety or panic, to overcome the dread or uncertainty of a task, to overcome being overwhelmed, and to motorically, behaviorally begin to start and then persist. And that's a challenge. We've all know what it feels like to be overwhelmed. How do I even start? That's not all. Depending on how you define EFs, there are 8 or 9 different ones. Flexibility is also a key executive function. That means you have the ability to shift and adapt. So I don't want cognitive rigidity. I don't want to always see it this way, only think it can or should be done only that way. You need to have flexibility to consider a different perspective, to update with new information, to go, oh, now that I know that, now I see what you really mean. Flexibility to adapt when A doesn't work and B doesn't work, and you need to regroup. And then finally, overarching all of these is self-awareness and self-appraisal. And this can be particularly challenging in the autism population. The same neural pathways that we use for social awareness and social insight are the same neural pathways our brain depends upon for self-appraisal and self-awareness. So We often see a student who might think that they've done everything they need to and are adamant that it's all complete, but we know it's not. A student who may not fully realize they need a certain amount of help whereas we may find that to be obvious. So appraisal. This is a different model that just presents this information. If you start at the top, behavioral inhibition, okay, so whatever it is we're doing at the moment, you have to stop, notice, look around, pay attention, hear the information, see the information, and have a moment where your brain says, oh, okay, I need to do this thing. To inhibit whatever's going on long enough gives your brain the opportunity to ponder and consider a plan of attack. Okay? So now look at all of the different variables that come into planning. Working memory to hold in mind what I heard you just say. An ability to use language to generate possibilities and to talk through those possibilities with myself. What could I do? What should I do? What might work? How might that work? Planning, as I said, it also is dependent upon critical reasoning, abstract reasoning. So can I deduce relationships? Can I figure out cause and effect? Can I figure out a likely outcome? Planning is also dependent upon my mood and my ability to motivate so that I can overcome a lot of emotional distress if I'm feeling anxious about that lab assignment or panicked because I missed class yesterday. Ultimately, we want a novel strategic plan. And finally, that's all fine and well and good, but you need to be able to start and execute. And so is the student able to initiate with efforts that is goal directed? That is, it should be relevant to the task and to the expectation. Can I monitor how well I'm doing? Can I evaluate the quality of what's going on here? Respond to feedback and shift my responses. So it's a complex set of things. There's some key things to keep in mind about executive functions. We're talking about the longest developmental trajectory of any other human skill, 25 years plus. Okay, just to wire up the pathways to get to a point where you can say, okay, now we're looking at a mature set of executive functions, or mature to whatever level this brain has the ability to achieve. Executive functions are highly vulnerable to trauma, developmental disorders, environmental influences, a lot of different medical and mental health disorders. And this is not the same as one's intellect. So an IQ score or your intellectual cognitive ability is one thing, but the executive functions are more about how you use what you know, how you employ knowledge combined with reasoning to overall orchestrate relevant effort, modify relevant effort, and achieve some outcome. And so that's why it's so essential to think about executive functions, because they are what allow us to achieve the highest level of self-regulation possible. So, you hear often people are talking a lot about you want your student to be able to advocate for themselves, and that is absolutely true. Fundamentally, you can't escape that. However, you also need executive functions to self-drive, because that's really what brings it home at the end of the day. EFs are often assumed to develop and be automatically available. Pardon me. And that's just not the case. Specifically, they often need a lot of direct teaching, explicit demonstration, modeling, practice, repeated practice over time. And yet they are highly correlated directly to academic performance, social success, vocational outcomes, and levels of independence. Briefly, from birth to 5, these EF skills, are very immature. Obviously, we're just looking at very simple attention. Other people are monitoring. Other people are regulating. Other people are looking out for and giving plans. But what you really want between the ages of, 1 and 5 is some basic attention, some beginning ability to shift and inhibit, and some minimally strategic, simple plans. Early childhood is the time where we begin to see brain development give us the potential for more self-directed attention, selective attention, simple strategic planning, thinking about what might happen, coming up with plans, much less guesswork, better inhibitory control. But still, we're talking kids who are the ages of 7 to 12. When we move into early adolescence, the brain begins to shift if all things are moving along in a typical manner. You have relatively mature inhibitory control and shifting. Now think about that. Relatively mature, meaning I could sit a 13 or 14-year-old down and give them a standardized assessment, and they might have typical adult level scores in a controlled testing environment, but that's not what reality is. And so, we all can think about teenagers sometimes who are doing really mature things, and sometimes they're doing the most impulsive, outlandish, poorly thought out things. And that's normal for the adolescent brain. When we move into the late teen and early adult years, the brain itself doesn't continue necessarily to need more neural development. Rather, what that brain needs is daily practice and opportunity. It's like if you learn to tie your shoe, you need to do it over and over and over. The same applies here. That your prefrontal cortex and these executive function skills are sitting there in need of real world, real life opportunities to practice. And that can be complicated because, at the same time you're trying to figure out how to facilitate practice planning, people are also busy, and there are schedules, and there are due dates, and there are multiple kids at home, and people are working 2 jobs or more. And so sometimes the reality is you find yourself simply saying, do this, and you end up reminding your student and double checking for them. And I've been there. It's not an easy thing to kind of step back the reins and find a good balance between telling the teenager you need to do this and you need to do it this way versus helping the teenager think through and ponder and come up with possibilities. It's very time consuming. Anyway, what is the point? Well, we want to be able to access and complete some type of education and training. We want to be able to make, quote, good decisions. That is, regulate our emotions, stay out of legal trouble, keep our jobs, cope with life because life is very messy, adapt socially, try to avoid repeating our mistakes. All of these things are really an outgrowth and an extension of executive function. Now, when things go wrong, executive dysfunction is when you present with and can be diagnosed with clinical deficits in any or all of those individual executive function processes. From a standardized assessment perspective, all of those, that list of EFs, those can all be separated out distinctly and evaluated and statistically compared so that you can look at, are you within the range of a typical presentation, or are you demonstrating, difficulty in that area that's clinically significant? That is, it's disordered. So it's you need a lot of assessment and analysis. Getting an assessment of executive function can be challenging. It's time consuming. The tests are complicated. Sometimes there can be a wait list. It can be expensive to do an assessment like this. And they're often, if not nearly always, executive dysfunction is co-occurring with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, language disorders, and many other diagnoses, anxiety, depression, dyslexia, dysgraphia. Executive dysfunction in and of itself is not a standalone magic diagnosis. It just describes problems that occur in addition to these other primary diagnoses. So it's kind of an assumed partner. The question is, how bad is it? And also, another difficult thing is that a lot of assumptions are made about students who present with executive dysfunction. They should just try harder. He's so smart if he would just pay attention. I've told him 1,000 times. I don't know why he doesn't double check. They just need to organize themselves. If he would just apply himself and organize, it would be great. And my favorite, the parents are just doing too much for them. They're babying him. He'll never learn. I can tell you that kids with executive dysfunction need more support, not less. And to pull the rug out from under them and simply say, okay, by virtue of the fact that you're now 16 or 18 or 14 or whatever, you are old enough, you should be able to do this, will fail almost every single time. Kids with executive dysfunction have difficulty in a number of different areas. And you can imagine, because there are 8 or 9 different EF skills and they're all on the table. So there's a whole range of things that can go wrong. And I typically look at them in profiles and try to subcategorize them. But inattention, distractibility, failing to notice where, what, who, difficulty with working memory. I don't recall what was said, so I'm missing critical information. A lot of prompting to redirect, to take notice of, to double check. Kids with executive dysfunction often have difficulty accurately monitoring their own work, and they're not aware that they've overlooked something. They're not aware that they haven't completed all of the information, not aware. So overlooking parts of tasks, might be working quickly, skimming over things, making assumptions that their work is complete, it is accurate. We see deficits in time sense all the time. Difficulty estimating how much time is left, how much time has passed, how much time do I have before I need to do this. Overestimating performance and underestimating time. Absolutely not able to intuitively use a planner or other work tracking systems. Deficits in awareness, difficulty noting subtle or social implied clues. So, teachers or other adults who say, well, I've given them a look, and you're like, so what? The look didn't mean anything. Difficulty shifting and adapting. And so I'd love to do it a different way, but I'm not quite sure how. I'd love to try another strategy, but I can't anticipate how that might look. Difficulty with complex language and reasoning. So yes, I can't determine the implication. I literally can't think through the line of cause and effect. So no, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Difficulty coming up with a specific action to take or breaking large tasks into small achievable components. Can be easily overwhelmed, panicked, full of anxiety, might work or do things impulsively even without a plan. Leaving things to the last minute. Really, ultimately, none of these things feels good internally. And just to read through the list of things kind of makes me feel a little bit anxious. And so a lot of kids will kind of collapse with executive dysfunction, or just need a lot of help. So some things to think about. These deficits are persistent and frustrating and absolutely exhausting. Often students with executive dysfunction experience so much chronic failure that it impacts their self-esteem. They don't necessarily feel a sense of optimism or, success. And some other strategies that typically don't work, or approaches that typically don't work, is expecting that a child will miraculously grow out of these things, or that by virtue of just arriving on campus and now you'll see and now you're going to learn that you have to organize yourself. No, it doesn't work that way. Also throwing out strategies and saying things like, well, he'll write things in the planner. That's fine. But that isn't a substitute for all of those other executive function skills. So Moving into, again, there are differences between the K through 12 and post-secondary education world. So students, in K through 12 and parents were working with IEPs and 504 plans. There's a team of people. Parents may be heavily involved, a lot of accommodations and modifications. What changes in college is that we're no longer really, if your student is moving into a degree-seeking situation. I'm at college, I've been accepted to this university. I intend to study something and earn a degree. We are not talking any longer about modifications to the content or the curriculum. There are accommodations available, but it's the student who has to be responsible for seeking those and driving that process in terms of communicating with their faculty member. So accommodations are any type of change that removes the barriers so the student can access the learning environment or access the information. But there won't be a change in the course syllabus. There won't be, special different deadlines or changes in the amount or type of homework or projects that are assigned. So typically, most college students, are seeing things like extra time on a test or an accessible test-taking environment. Maybe they would have access to note takers or software for that, possibly access to lectures before class, priority registration, and so forth. Really, to have modifications would be an absolute exception and not the rule. Any student on any university campus would be able to access different general academic supports. It could come from an office such as the Academic Support Services, and they might offer small segments and 30-minute consults for general tips on studying or tips to manage your time or note-taking strategies. But these are short and succinct and one-time kinds of interactions. These are not meant as a resource, check-in point. They're not meant as the end of the day or the beginning of the day for intensive double checking and confirming. There are also on university campuses writing centers that are designed to help students edit and revise drafts of a paper. So not to help you produce the paper, but rather to help you reframe it or edit it. And then, of course, most departments, if not all, will have tutors, and those are usually graduate students or maybe seniors who've taken that course. And they're there to give general help in reviewing the material, clarifying questions, but it's not a specialized or intensive reteaching of the information. Oh, I just did that, sorry. So what about college students who have autism? So, there's a tremendous increase in students on campus who have autism. Most, even now, still most of them are male. In this particular study, they found that more of them were involved or enrolled in STEM programs, and often had a comorbid diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. In STEP, in our program, we have, 25% female to 75% male. Looking at our data over the last 9 years. However, they're not mostly enrolled in STEM. Our students are majoring in everything across campus. And this study, lots of studies have found that students with autism in college all tend to struggle with anxiety, depression, difficulty with social communication, find it hard to adjust to the openness of the day. There's a lack of structure. They really have difficulty with poor executive functions and managing time and schedule. And this study was looking at what kinds of accommodations were college students with autism reporting that they used. And again, it's a pretty standard list of things: extended time, maybe a note taker, maybe meeting periodically with somebody in disability services, preferential seating, but you can see there's no modification really going on here. Challenges of college students. I'm looking at my time here and kind of wanting to move us ahead. Being socially isolated can be a significant challenge. Our students really have a lot of difficulty figuring out relationships, meeting people, building friendships. We talk a lot about whether or not they feel like masking or adapting or not, and when they think they might want to or need to, versus when they just don't care or it's not important. There are a lot of decisions for this person to make, you know. They struggle to use coping strategies for or to recognize when people are making implying an expectation and they're not aware of it. A lot of difficulty regulating sleep, meds, hygiene, being overwhelmed easily. We also find that students really struggle with enrolling in too many courses at first, finding themselves inadvertently in an online section or a hybrid section of a class, students who declare a major immediately. Most of the time, when they've done that, they've changed it 2, 3, 4 times. Difficulty with coping, insufficient mental health supports. I'm often suggesting to parents really keep whatever mental health plan in place that you currently have, keep that available to the student when they arrive on campus. Difficulty with critical thinking and reasoning, burnout, difficulty seeking help. So, who is really directing this student? These are questions to be asking of yourself and your student in high school. How much help am I giving? How often? What kind of help does my student need? Is it because they overlook it? Is it because they forget to do it? Is it because they have difficulty starting? What's the pattern here? And being more cognizant of those things as much as possible, leading up to leaving high school. The more you think about these things in those last years of high school, the easier it is for the student to begin to practice and then be better prepared for college. This scale, the Parent Academic Management Scale, just offers some questions. In a typical week, how often are you helping organize your students' materials, write in a planner, check for grades, figure out what to do, how many days? And then also the adolescent or the parent or the teacher, could anybody fill this out? How often is this a problem? Not following through on homework instructions, or having difficulty organizing, or turning in work that's incomplete. So these are nice questions that can help promote maybe a starting point of looking at the hard things with a realistic lens. I want to talk a little bit about 3 or 4 different executive function challenges, and the first one is awareness. So it's another reason I put these 2 questionnaires up is because they can give you an opportunity to think and ask your student to complete them. And you can compare, how do you view the help your student needs and how do they view this? Okay, it's very enlightening because strategies are entirely dependent. Self-regulation and my use of strategies is entirely dependent upon my having accurate awareness of when I need help and why I need help. So if we have a mismatch between what you know about your student and what they think about it, you know, you'll have a person who just looks at you and says, well, I don't know why I would need to do that. We struggle with this. I would say on average, it takes 2 years, 2 years to build awareness to a point where it begins to kind of really sink in. This is not a one conversation thing. You know, and especially with planners. And I kind of land on and harp on planners because I see that written in every IEP goal. And it makes me crazy because with also, not only is awareness about a 2-year curve, planners is easily a 2-year endeavor, easily. You have to decide what's due and when and why and where and how. You have to do time estimation. You have to break the task into components. You have to pre-schedule yourself. You need to figure out when to start. You need to monitor what's due. You need to update this planner daily. You need to assimilate what should even go into that planner from email, from a printed syllabus, from something on your online learning system, from the PowerPoint slides, from what was said in class. there's a massive amount coming into that must be sorted, prioritized, and ordered. Using planners is a real challenge. So while you have an opportunity to build awareness, at the same time teach strategies, at the same time you talk with your student about when you're using that strategy and why you're using that particular strategy, and then to gradually begin to transition from I'm telling you how, I'm telling you when. Gradually, the student needs to start practicing telling themselves how or when or why. Whatever the strategy is, you need deliberate practice. I'm going to keep going. Therapeutic failure. Well, this is when you, within the bounds of reason, within safety, within preserving your student's self-esteem, you allow failure. Or you set up a circumstance where you know they're going to need help. It's a way to let the chips fall, so to speak, and let your student kind of have an aha moment where they go, oh, I guess I didn't turn any of it in. I guess I didn't ask to be sure. I guess I see what you're saying now. This is so important. It's so hard to do. This is maybe the most difficult thing to do clinically as a therapist, as a parent, and yet it's almost the most essential thing. And I see a wide variety of students who show up, and some of them have had lots of opportunities with support to move through life's ups and downs, and then begin to have an opportunity to employ thinking and managing and reasoning. And then I see other students who've not had those opportunities, and it's just a vast difference of things. So, again, within the reason of what you have time for on any given day, don't necessarily give or do or plan everything. Give your student an opportunity to try to brainstorm and think to themselves, what might I need? What could I do? What might happen? And talk through these things so that you can facilitate that. When you do that, what you're really doing is facilitating neural pathways to develop and wire up in the brain. It's kind of a magic, cool thing. You want to get a moment where your student kind of has this aha, like, now I realize. What that means is you have to wait for their brain to make those connections. You have to wait while processing takes place, and it can be really challenging. Also, you can build awareness by comparing predicted with actual outcomes. So, how well do you think you'll do on this? How much help do you think you might need? How many unintentional errors do you think you might have? Get those predictions on paper. And it's not a punitive discussion. It's not a challenge per se. You're just inquiring. How do you think it's going to go? I wonder what's going to happen, without judgment. And you can track this on the whiteboard. You can track it on a homework predictor, however you want to do. And then you let the process move through organically. They do the assignment, they complete the homework sheet, they do whatever it is. You can go back after the fact and say, oh, well, let's see how that went. I wonder if our prediction was accurate. So if I predict, and this is just a cool chart that this was a chart with a kid who was, I don't know, 13 or 14 at the time, had been in honors classes, and then was struggling in middle school, and grades started to tank. And he really had his main challenge at that point in time was awareness. He genuinely had such significant deficits in accurately evaluating how things were going. He was kind of, not bothered, not worried, not aware, really would report to you that, no, my parents don't double check or remind me. No, it's all good. So he would estimate, he brought in his actual homework, and he would estimate, and we would write this down. He'd say, I'm not going to have any errors. I'm not going to overlook anything. I'm not going to get any of these questions wrong. But then in actuality, missing 8, missing 18, missing 3, missing 6. So when you're doing predicted versus actual, your goal isn't to eliminate all the problems necessarily. Your goal is to get accurate prediction. That means you have an accurate sense of understanding of how am I really doing? And you can do the same thing for time. How long do you think it will take you to gather up the trash and get them out to the bins versus actual time? How long do you think it will take you to fold the towels, take them to the bathrooms, sort the darks and how long? And again, this is not to make the task go quicker. You're just trying to get accuracy between predicted and actual. But the thing is this, you have to build awareness requires that you do this over and over and over. I mean, you need to do it so many times, you're going to think, will this ever stick? And it will, but it takes a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance. And, we're talking a couple of years to really move through. That's why so often, this idea that, well, I told him he needs to just learn how to do this, really doesn't address the actual facet of the problem. You can also build awareness through freezing the moment and saying, okay, hang on. What are we working on? What did you just say? What did you just look for? Where did you just find that? Hang on, is this working out for you? What are you working on right now? Oh, okay. What did you plan to work on? Oh, you were going to work on the math homework. Well, what's happening right now? Labeling that problem. Okay, so I see what happened here was this is incomplete. You mean you didn't mean to, but we overlooked. Oh, I see, this was inaccurate. Well, that was confusing. And you're not doing this in a punitive sense. Again, you're simply labeling things to help the student begin to build a sense of self-appraisal. Like, oh yeah, like I know if I showed you my desk right now, there are about 34 sticky notes with a black Sharpie marker because I know I need that or I won't recall things. So we're just building awareness. What about planning and doing homework? Get your homework done requires all of the things on this slide. Go do your homework. Well, that assumes I can figure out everything that's required. It assumes I can analyze the level of difficulty in the task and the expectations. It assumes I can monitor and double check and confirm that I'm accurate with what is expected. It assumes I can break them into steps, that I can start, that I can monitor time and task, that I can prioritize. I got task confirmation there twice. This is really complicated. And, when you have a support person, whether it's at school or at home, standing next to your student and saying, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. You get accurate work. You probably get more timely work. What you don't get is an opportunity to self-practice all of those skills. This is something we used in STEP. What kind of task requirement? Is it a length and format requirement? As in, how many pages does it need to be? Is it single-spaced? What kind of citation? Or is it a PowerPoint? Or is it a 5-minute speech? What is it and how long? We also work on what I call Turn-It-In requirements, which are just the basics. When is it due? And how is it due? Do you bring it to class? Do you upload it? Do you email it? So often, most of the time, students only look at the Turn-It-In requirements. And that's often the only thing that is embedded in a planner. It's due on the 12th. But you have to specifically look at these other things. What exactly is due on the 12th? And finally, at the bottom are these content and critical thinking. And that is a tremendous challenge as well. What kind of thinking do you have to compare, contrast, explain, elaborate, defend, argue? What is it that you're going to need to do? These are some different kinds of templates. You could make up anything like this that would work for you. But what are the Turn-It-In requirements? What are the length and format requirements? And what about content and critical thinking? You can put these in a list format. I often like to write them down on blank index cards for the different things that have to be done. And then you can move them around physically on the table and explore what order to do things in. And if you don't like that order, or if you think that might need to be arranged, you can move the index cards in a different way. I like to introduce vocabulary words that serve homework, like, did you monitor? Did you find? Did you confirm? Did you clarify? You can use self-talk. I need to focus, notice, find it, fix it. Focus, notice, find it, fix it. Where have you looked? Okay. Everywhere, where all have you looked? And what did they say? Different things to think about there. We do a lot of work with homework analysis. Why did you lose points on that? Let's take a look at that. What was the grade? What was the feedback? What did the professor say? Most of the time a student will come in and the answer will be, I just need to study more. I'll just have to work harder. I'll have to try really hard. That's all fine and well and good, and it's all true, but it doesn't specify how or why. So we go back and evaluate why. Actually, was it unclear? Was it incomplete? Did you skip over things? Did you not demonstrate that you understood the concepts? Was it late? Okay. And I try to move students from this generic idea of, well, I'm going to read over it. I'll look through it. Those are passive and generic. I want specific thinking verbs: compare, sort, choose, identify, explain. And I will say with this also, I use a lot of Bloom's revised taxonomy and concepts of critical thinking. A good 2 years of talking about this. I have a student right now who's just kind of finally come into this, and he gave me the eye roll every single time last year. I would work with him individually every week, and amongst other things that we're working with him, just look at me like, lady, you're crazy. I don't know why we're doing this. Finally, now he's looking at me and saying, I need to compare. I need to explain how and why. It's just a really cool thing to see, but it does take a long time. What are the steps in the plan? I often talk a lot about helping the student figure out what's urgent, and critical. And I like to pair this idea of urgency with a visual of the passage of time. Anything you can do to make time tangible is useful. We talk a lot about daily goals. Every day, check your email, check your planner, look at your schedule. Every day. There are set things, and then there's this floating open free time. And often students will look at the open time in between classes as nothing is needed. I have nothing else to do today. I talk a lot about, can you assign yourself work? What is it you need to do today between 1 and 5? Nothing, something. Visual templates, long-term planning. You can see the point here. I'm trying to break things into specific components. And I'm mindful that we need to stop in about a minute. So I'm also looking at helping the student be very deliberate about yearly goals. And I ask them, what a year from now, what kind of things do you want to be able to do academically? A year from now, how much help do you think you would like to still need from us? A year from now, how independently do you think you might be figuring out your assignments or using a planner? The last few slides here are just about STEP at EIU. If parents are interested, you're welcome to get in touch with me. Shannon, I'll stop now and
feel free. We don't have any questions yet. So if you
okay,
want to go through maybe a little bit more about this step,
sure.
I'll let you know if any other questions come up.
Okay.
Wrapping up.
Okay, great. STEP is a program here at Eastern. We're in our 9th year. We're an autism support program across the country. There are about 100 autism support programs. And most of them, if nearly all of them are dealing with a student who's seeking a degree. So that student is applying to the university just like anybody else, but then you're also applying to that autism support program. We emphasize executive function, social navigation, self-awareness, and self-regulation. We do a lot of communication and interaction across campus and back and forth with parents as well. We're really looking at, yeah, here's this list of different services that we do, both individual and small group. STEP is a fee-based service per semester. There's our full version is $3,000 a semester, and our less intensive version is $1,500 a semester. Everybody that we admit into our program starts in the full version of STEP, and we reevaluate that every semester. We do early move-in and orientation, visual schedules, routine, weekly individual coaching, small group work for all of the things we've been talking about here, and also small group work for social communication and work-life transitions. We have a team of peer mentors. They're undergrad students that apply to work with us, and we train and orient them, and they're paired up with one student for the year. We do a lot of social events. We have a lot of rec and leisure supports that help students figure out what else they'd like to do on campus besides just go to class. Study tables. We do a lot of advocacy and support for and with the student. You know, would that student be a good match for STEP? In high school, they're probably doing college level coursework. Again, some realistic insight into needs. And a student really has to want to have help in STEP. Some experience and success directing parts of their day. Fairly able to use some coping strategies, and of course, a diagnosis of autism. You know, when we look at a student as we meet them, we meet everybody through a visit either here on campus or in Zoom, and then there are application materials. But we're looking at, you know, how much independence does that person currently have? If a student is applying and thinking about going to the university, but they're maximally dependent upon somebody else to, pardon me, they need somebody else pretty much all the time to help them adjust and cope and communicate and read and learn and so on and so forth. In this far left column, that student is probably not a good match for the university environment, and we're not able to provide quite that much support. On the other hand, of course, there are students who are on campuses all over the country that have autism, and they're not necessarily needing support. So we're kind of operating in those middle areas. We admit students in the fall of each year. You can visit us anytime. We see people who are in their junior, senior year of high school. We have transfer students. Our application deadline is January 31st. We work really hard to get all those admission decisions out in February. We're a small program. We can provide services to no more than 30 students in a given year. And truthfully, our admission, we've admitted a group as large as 12 in the fall and as few as 8. It really just depends each year on how many of our students are graduating and won't need us in the coming year. You do want to have a recent neuropsych assessment on board, if at all possible. That's one thing that we would be looking at. And there's my contact information if you want to call or email to get more details.